Women and the church. That can get into some very emotional and hot areas, and we're going there today. I'm Dr. Carol, and thank you for joining me on this episode. I have experienced stuff in church because I'm a woman, and many of you who are watching may have experienced the same. Well, we're going to just get really real and raw in this conversation today. My conversation partner is Dr. Andrew Bauman. He is a former pastor and he has a doctorate from Northeastern University. He is the founder and director of Christian Counseling Center for Sexual Health and Trauma. He's also written a book, Safe Church: How to Guard Against Sexism and Abuse in Christian Communities. If you are a bit easily triggered, you may want to just put this particular episode on hold for another time, because we get very real. And Dr. Bauman's language it's really out there. It's a bit confronting. So let me just encourage you to listen with an open heart and make your own conclusions. But there is some stuff that we all, as followers of Jesus, need to deal with here that we talk about. Kind of the gloves are off, and we're going there about women in the church. In many ways, it's not pretty, but there is hope and goodness. Dr. Bauman has a personal story that kind of leads in, and it will help you understand his perspective and where he comes from. And we kind of joust back and forth in a really good and I believe helpful way in this conversation. So here is Dr. Andrew Bauman. Dr. Andrew Bauman, it is a privilege to have you on the program today. It's the first time you and I are speaking, but there's so much I think we have in common. Thank you for being here.
Yes, it looks like we run in similar circles, so it's good to connect with you.
Yeah. As I was finding out a little bit about you, reading a little bit about where you came from and reading your book, Safe Church, it occurred to me that your center, you make public that it has to do with sexual wholeness and healing from
Mhm.
trauma, Christian Counseling Center, and you help men deal with their behaviors. But this book is
Yes,
about women.
that's
So,
right. That's right.
with all the work you've done with men, let me just start with asking, how did you get interested in looking at the experience of Christian
Yeah.
women in the church?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a lot of different entry points. One entry point is I was a former pastor and also a recovering sexist and a porn user for 13 years. And so I was realizing that my own history of objectifying women was
Mm,
mixing with a degrading view of theology and an
mm,
oppressive view of
mm,
women that
mm,
really worked with my pornographic mindset that women were just a little bit less than, that
mm.
women were we would never say that out loud,
Yeah.
and yet they couldn't be a part of our, holy conversations of me as a pastor, and they needed to prepare my food and, serve me. But we were equal, but not really, different roles. And this nuance of gymnastics that we had to do to try to make sense. And so I was a pastor just for a year and a half in the Southern Baptist world. And then kind of realizing if I was actually honest with myself, I this is not this career field is not I couldn't be as honest. So that's one entry
Mm,
point.
mm,
Another entry point is my own story, my own origin story. As my father was a pastor, and also had a hidden sexual addiction and cheated on my mom for about 25 years and was a large evangelical figure in the 80s. And blew up my life, his life, when I was 7 years old.
mm,
So I'm 7 years old, and he ends up stealing money from he was a vice president of a Christian college as well. And because he was being blackmailed, and, it was just this huge drama.
yeah.
And so my mom goes numb to survive because all she wanted was to be, a Christian wife and focused on the family. And, every morning, James Dobson in our ears. And that blew up very early in my life. And so that's watching my mom wrestle with
Mm,
that. And we would go to church, 10 times a week. And the church in many forms parented me because I felt orphaned because I had a distant father,
Mm.
um, and a numb mother,
Yes.
and the church parented me in so many ways. So that like I became like to care deeply about the church.
Hmm.
And yet also as I began kind of unlearning and relearning what it actually meant for me to be a Christian, what it actually meant for me to have integrity, I realized like, wow, I learned a lot of unhealthy things.
Hmm.
And I need to relearn something much different because how we engage women is very different than how Jesus did. And then so that's one entry point. And then kind of my final entry point is in 2018, I was reading a survey called The Elephant in the Valley, which was a study on sexism in Silicon Valley. And then I was like, huh, I'm very curious. What about another male-dominated space that I know very well, that I care very deeply about, is 87% of churches are led by men. And so
Yes.
that began, I actually changed my dissertation at that, my doctoral dissertation at that point, and really focused just on, I want to study this. And so that
Hmm.
was kind of the culmination. I have, quite a few different entry
Yeah.
points of what made me passionate about this topic.
Yeah. Just to comment and question about your origin story first, and then we'll get into some of your
Hmm.
research. With your dad being in the church, I can
Hmm.
imagine the God talk and can I say trauma?
Hmm.
All that was mixed up. So beyond
Yes,
just your
exactly.
personal home blowing up, your perception and perspective and connection with God
Yes.
must have been challenged in that process.
Yes. Well, spiritual bypassing became the
Right.
norm,
Yep.
right? So anything that was difficult or that emotionally needed to be engaged or suffering or crucifixion, well, let's just pray about that. Well,
Yes.
let's just, let's actually not feel very deeply. Let's not suffer. Let God handle that.
Yeah.
Um, or my own development of my self-hatred and my self-contempt was viewed as
Mhm.
humility, and I was applauded for hating myself. And so all these concepts began to be very twisted and used against me. And yeah, it's gross. And I remember, this was maybe 15 years ago, thinking my dad was on his deathbed, and he didn't die till much later. It was more like eight years ago. But I remember 15 years ago, I have to confront my dad before he dies. And so
Mm.
I was like, I have to capture a story. So I did 8 hours of recording of
Wow.
his story and listening to him. And, finally I was nearing the end, and I was like, I've got to tell the truth. Like, I've got to. And so he was telling me about the Father heart of God. And I was
Yes.
kind of vomiting in my mouth a bit. And I
Mhm.
just said, well, Dad, do you know what it's like for me to have you as a father? Because he was also a narcissist. And so, I told him, I probably spoke for 30 seconds of what this has been like for him to not be part of my life, to be absent and to be full of himself and to feel orphaned by him. And he was like, oh, okay. That was it. So it was like eight
Oh.
hours. So the point wasn't for
Oh.
him to
Oh.
change. The point was the point was for me to be liberated, for me to stand up and speak my truth. But
Mm.
that's what I was dealing with. And yet like I needed to be free of his
Yes.
control. I needed to face that. I needed to feel that grief and that loss so I could be the man that I wanted to become. Which ultimately kind of breaking free and beginning to embrace integrity and actually, I think, a much healthier relationship with God
Mhm.
rather than using it to run from pain. God invites me deeper into my pain.
Yeah. It occurs to me, and I hadn't thought of this particular question until you're just describing that interaction with your dad now, that growing up the way you did and the disconnect between who God truly is and who he was portrayed to you as, and the trauma that you experienced, um, mirrors in many ways some of the church experiences that the women you write about and studied
Yes,
have. Now, men and
definitely.
women, okay, we're all children of God, and I'm not necessarily equating the two, But
Mhm.
you've experienced some of what so many women describe as having
Yeah.
experienced in the church.
Yeah, and I experienced it, secondhand from my mom,
Sure.
watching it from her,
Yeah.
and also, yeah, some from my father. But that's what happens if you deal with systems and people who are narcissistic and abusive, and spiritually bypass and don't actually take pain seriously, and don't honor broken hearts. Like, yeah, this is what happens. So there are a lot of parallels. You're right.
Yeah. Well, you did get into studying women and the
Hmm.
church and
Yeah.
interviewed or surveyed over 3,000 in-depth interviews with several. Just
Hmm.
highlight some of the things that you heard and saw in hearing their stories.
Yeah, so some of the main, big findings that we have now, from the book Safe Church and the research is that 82% of women. So this is real quick before I go into the statistics. Over 2,800 women. These aren't just women off the street, right? These are women. 16% of them worked 25 years or longer in the church.
Wow.
Okay, 25 years or longer. So this is front row seat
Wow.
to sexism and abuse. This is front
Mm.
row seat to what it's like to be a woman in a male dominated space. So I think it was 25% had worked 16 years or longer. So, these are women that have been there, done that. So I wanted
Yeah.
to approach this not as some, male splaining book, but actually like an investigative journalist, of
Yes.
just saying like, I want to figure it out because I've been in the seat of power. I am a white male who's worked in the church, who's worked with my buddies, and I had a blast. It was great. And, it was like I've been on that side of it as well. And I wanted to hear what was going on from a woman's perspective. And we did, and it's heartbreaking. So
Yeah.
some of the big findings, significant discoveries, were 82% of women believe that sexism plays a role in their church.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
82%.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
wild. So what is sexism, real quick? Prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping because of someone's sex. There's different types of sexism and whatnot, but you can read about that in the book.
Yeah.
And so 82% of women, 62% said they wouldn't be surprised if they heard a sexist joke
Mm.
in their
Mm.
church. So
Mm. Mm.
women in the kitchen, women drivers, like these are things
Yeah.
that I grew up hearing are
Yeah.
normalized,
Yeah.
ha ha ha. And yet they're not funny at all. And the research from Dr. Ford, he discovered that sexist jokes act as a releaser of pre-existing prejudice and antagonistic attitudes towards women.
Mhm. Mm.
So it's actually sexist humor acts as a releaser is what he discovered,
Yeah.
which is so telling. It's already in the water. It's already there. The misogyny is already built in to the theology. It's not actually about God. It's actually much more about our pornographic mindset, much more about the patriarchy that's been, bred into the text rather than understanding the patriarchal culture of Roman and Greek times. Um, some of the other statistics, 35.1% said they've been a victim of sexual harassment or some form of sexual misconduct while serving in ministry, or they answered it's complicated, right? So there's a story there. Yeah, there's some nuance there. And then 77.9% of women felt that their opportunity in ministry was limited due to their gender. And so those are just the stats. But for me, the real power in this were the stories.
Yes.
Oh, they're just the heartbreaking stories of these women. And I changed the names to protect anonymity. But Hannah was worked as a worship leader on her all male staff. And she remembers walking up to the church staff joking, they were joking, how do we increase church attendance? And one of them said, well, if we require the women to wear white t-shirts while they get baptized, that should
Oh.
increase church
Oh.
attendance.
Oh. Oh.
Right?
Oh.
What does Hannah do to process
Oh.
that? What does
Oh.
she feel about her own body, her own breast as she's objectified? Rose shares direct quote. Uh, she felt that the church placed responsibility on women for having bodies,
Mm.
Rather than holding men accountable for their perverse thoughts, she felt an unfair responsibility was placed on her, rather than men in leadership positions.
Yeah.
Kelly shared, I have a big butt, so I would always wear huge skirts to cover my butt, so I didn't want men to lust after me. Time and time again, you hear women taking on that burden to help change men's relationship to beauty and their objectification of women, rather than actually holding men accountable. One of the most egregious stories that I heard was from Rebecca. She's a teenage girl, and her parents would make them wear a full wet style modesty bathing suit, is what
Mm.
I've come to know these. So her whole
Yep.
body is covered to the
Yep.
lake on hot summer days.
Yep.
So her and her sisters as teenagers, and her father's friend would come with them. And then he applauded. He spoke to the father and said, "Thank you. I don't have to struggle with lust when I come to the lake with your family." And so then it was brought back to Rebecca and her sisters. "Thank you. You are protecting your brothers in Christ.
Mm.
Thank you for what you do."
Mhm.
Rather than, "Do you understand that you potentially are harboring a predator who is sexualizing teenage girls and pubescent girls?"
Yeah.
Like, who's confronting him?
Yeah.
Who's confronting the father's friend? Instead of making it about modesty and purity and placing the responsibility on these young teenage girls, the burden of their own beautiful God ordained bodies, we are sexualizing them and objectifying them. And then we're allowing the men to dictate what is normal. That's
Mm.
disgusting.
Well, you have been reasonably graphic, Andrew, and I appreciate that because I know for certain there are some listening or watching who will identify with some of those stories. I'm going to raise my hand and say hashtag me too, hashtag church
Mm.
too. I
Mhm.
experienced some overt, direct
Yes.
sexual harassment from someone who was in spiritual authority over me. That's been a number of years ago now.
Mm.
Thankfully, I found out that I was not the only one, and
Right.
another woman and I went to leadership, and it was dealt with, I
Mm.
believe, in an appropriate way. But just to say,
Good.
um, this is not a hidden one, occasionally out there,
Nope.
0.1%. This is sadly common. Not all,
Yes.
thankfully, not all, but it is much more common than it should be.
Yes. This is
Yeah,
the norm. This is not an exception.
yeah,
We just don't want to see it. Or churches protect the institution and their
yeah,
reputation, and
yep,
so they don't make it public,
yep,
right? They don't report it to the authorities. They keep it under wraps because they want to protect the institution. And I, really appreciate Dr. Diane
yes,
Lamberg legend, right, in her book Redeeming Power, where she
yeah,
talks about we are to speak truth to systems, but systems are not made in the image of God.
yeah,
People are made in the image of God, right? People are to be honored, but
yeah.
systems, we can speak truth to power.
Mm, mm. You mentioned a couple times pornography that had been part
Hmm.
of your story, and you mentioned the pornographic mindset. You write that porn is abusive to women. Would you just
Hmm.
unpack that a bit because it is such a enormous factor for many,
Yes.
including for many pastors, based on Barna's research. It's
Hmm.
it's it's a big deal. Why is it
Yeah,
such a big deal?
it's a huge deal because it gets into our minds, right? Gets into our mindset and it impacts how we relate. So what I
Yeah,
call that is a pornographic style of relating. And you can look that up in my book, The Psychology of Porn. But I talk about how the pornographic style of relating, if porn is our main mentor, if porn is our guide in our sexual development, then it impacts how we relate to the world,
yeah,
right? And so if you are a pastor and you feel like if you're honest, you're going to lose your job. If you feel like you can't be, and so shame then goes underground.
yeah,
So then what happens is then much of the way we relate to women, because of our unprocessed shame, becomes projection. So then instead of dealing with my shame, I'm going to push it out and make it about what you wear or what you don't wear. I'm going to make it about preaching about modesty.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave the door open in the Billy Graham rule, and I'm going to feel really good about how above reproach I am because you don't know, she may, want to jump on me. No, she doesn't want you at all. You are protecting yourself from yourself
Mhm.
because you know there's darkness in you that you have not addressed your unhealed wounds.
Mm,
That's what's going
mm,
on. And
mm.
that's what makes you a dangerous leader.
Wow. The darkness within you, that has become a significant part of your work. In looking a
Yes.
little bit about what you do,
Hmm.
you hold regular, weekend retreats for guys, helping them
Oh, yeah.
process this, both in the church context more broadly, and then just maybe a word or two about how your process works.
Oh,
What
yes.
do guys need to do?
Yeah. I mean, that's what we do. That's our cornerstone program, and folks from all over the world are coming. And basically, our tagline is basically helping men address destructive behaviors, outgrow destructive behaviors so that they can live courageous lives. And so to me, so much the fundamental problem of the church, of society, is this is a male issue because we're the ones perpetrating it.
Mm,
Yes, women struggle with porn. Yes, all that. Of course, women struggle being abusive. But to me, this is so much of like, who's buying sex?
mm,
Who are
mm,
the main ones with power and
mm,
leadership and money? This is a male domestic violence. This is a male issue.
mm,
And so if we don't fully address the abusiveness within us, if we don't
mm.
address our own violence, I don't think this stops. So I want to not just, deal with the behaviors of
Right.
here's 10 steps how to stop looking at porn. I want to
Okay,
address
stop porn. Yes, stop porn. But that's just the outside.
yes, I want to address why do you hate women?
Yeah.
Let's go to your wounds. Let's
Mm,
go to what you're eroticizing, what you're sexualizing, because that is what we need to deal with so you can stop the violence.
wow. Wow. Yeah. Um, for men who may be hearing pieces of themselves, even though
Mhm.
your language and it's kind of out there, but there's a lot of guys who are saying this to themselves,
Yes.
and
Hmm.
who will say, oh, okay, I might not tell anybody, but yeah, that's
Yep.
me. Um,
Correct.
might you just speak for a couple minutes to the guys who are
Yeah.
identifying, even if they don't want
Totally.
to
I mean,
admit it?
I one of my books I wrote is called How Not to Be an Ass, essays on being a good and safe man. And so I speak like this because I know my own darkness,
Yeah,
but I also know that I'm never going to turn on myself and just become full of self-contempt because I also know my goodness and my glory.
good,
And when I
good.
can hold those side by side and never become too prideful or never become too self-contemptuous and actually can hold that tension. And so, yes, I say it because I know it, because I've lived it for 13 years, objectifying women and using women. It's like, I know that part of me. I don't
Mm,
want to be that anymore. I know what it's like to be an abusive man, and I want to continue to be an advocate for women and being an advocate for men. I get a lot of heat on social media of, oh, this is just some, feminist leader. And it's just like, oh my gosh, it's just so ridiculous. It's like, I believe in men so much, but we've also, in a sense, have socialized masculinity into being these like adolescent cavemen
yeah.
of emotional intelligence. And it's such, you know, just bullshit of like this men are capable of so much goodness, so much intimacy, but we've held them to such a low standard. So, our level one men's workshop is just, a 4-day program. And yet, again, when men begin to lift those weights, emotional intelligence, and actually do the work, it's like, gosh, after 4 days of training, like they can come out and like, oh, like you actually intimacy is not as scary as you thought it was. So most of the weekend, they're 6 inches eye to eye from each other's faces and are terrified because the socialization of masculinity, when are men face to face? Only through competition, right? Boxing, UFC. When are they actually taught as young little boys that intimacy is okay?
I'm
No,
so
it
glad
was.
you went there to intimacy.
Mhm,
That's a word I have been using so much
mhm,
in helping people understand sex is not intimacy. Now, it
mhm.
should be, sex should be connected with intimacy, but when those things are separated, then you get into porn and all this, all
Exactly.
the objectification and
Exactly.
the harm. And
Correct.
for a man to come to understand intimacy is not only possible, but it
Yep.
nourishes me that none of this other stuff did.
Exactly. So what is the opposite of addiction, right? It's not
Yep.
sobriety, it's connection, right? So we're
Yes.
longing for connection, and yet so many men, we don't know how to connect because we viewed porn as penetration. And not only penetration, it's about my orgasm. It's about me. It's not actually about my partner because, porn is taught us how to be so selfish in our
Exactly.
sexuality rather
Yes.
than mutual pleasure, mutual giving and receiving of pleasure and sharing that. And so, yeah, we break it down and really go back to, okay, what does it mean to connect? What does it mean to actually, I'm terrified of intimacy and I
Yes.
so long for it.
Yes. I'm glad you're speaking with hope. Both, oh, okay, this is really bad, but you don't have to stay there. And I think
Hmm.
that's the message of the gospel. And
Yeah, that's right.
I think from what I've read and seen of you, you believe the same, that the message of the gospel is you don't have to stay there. Something good is possible because
That's
of
right.
Jesus. It's not bypassing. It's not, oh, let's just pray about it and everything's going to be okay.
That's
There's a
right.
journey, there's work, but it is
That's right.
possible.
That's right. And I'm reminded of Luke 4:18 of when Jesus shares his mission and purpose is to set the captives free and the prisoners of society.
Yeah.
And who were the prisoners? Well, when you look at, the oppressive Roman rule, in the early Greek literature, that was so gross to women and so oppressive to women. It's like, and then you look at Jesus's relationship with women, and it's just like, there is hope. There is hope for us. There is liberation, both for men and women. You don't have
Yes.
to remain being an abusive man, but there is a lot to unlearn. There is
Yes.
a lot to unlearn because you're swimming in the society that still celebrates and the objectification of women's cells. It's just like you're part of the system, and I'm so ready to be done with it.
Yes. And I might reflect the pornified way of relating actually objectifies men too. And you
Yes,
kind of briefly referenced this in the past. So it makes both men and women less than the children of God that we are designed to be. Um,
exactly.
Thanks for being that honest to men. A word or two to women. If there are some women who are still listening and watching, and I believe there are,
Yes.
who are feeling like, wow, somebody's speaking truth, but I've been hurt, I've been harmed. What might you say to women who find themselves in church and
Hmm.
things aren't okay?
Yes, yes. Well, the first thing, like, I want you to begin to change your relationship with your body. A woman's intuition has been a threat to the patriarchy. It's been a threat to male institution. It's been a threat to our sexuality and to our sexual addiction. Um, so if I can turn you against your own body, if I can turn you against your own intuition, then I can remain addicted. I can remain in power and control, right? So one, trust your gut. Your
Mm-hmm.
body is not your enemy. God lives in your body. So what happens if you curse your body? I think you curse God.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm.
what if it was that connected, right? Like that would change your relationship to your body, hopefully, that if you curse your body, you curse God. And so that's
Yeah,
one thing. Obviously, you know,
yeah,
finding your power, stepping into your using your voice, and just, as far as the church is concerned, like we just got to start the conversation. We got to start speaking up. How many sermons have you heard on domestic violence?
yeah,
How many sermons have you heard on sexual abuse? And
yeah,
yet, one out of three women in your church,
right.
one out of four women in your church have suffered some type of domestic violence. This is normal. And so there's people out there, and yet so many people are like, why there's no, my church is, no churches around here are doing that. It's like, I get it. If you're in a rural place, but online, find your tribe. You can follow me on social media. We got a whole group of, I write about men and for men, and like 80% of my, 60, 70,000 followers are women. Like, why? Like, why? I'm not even writing to women. And yet it took me years to realize, oh, I am, because they're actually finding healing and liberation having a man speak because they've been gaslit by so many Christian communities. And actually, a man who's trying to understand it and learn, and they're finding healing in my work. when I'm like, oh wait, I thought I was just writing to men. I'm just working with men, but I'm not. Uh,
Yeah. That's really good. And it occurs to me as you say that, that as a woman, and I think my sisters would agree, we don't want a man's strength to lord it over us, but
correct.
we are energized and want a man's strength to be for us.
Bingo. And that's why I think so many, when I'm speaking about this, all around, I fear men are fearing that I'm asking if we actually give up our power, then women are going to treat us like we treat them.
Mm, mm,
I'm not
mm.
I'm not advocating for another
Right.
oppressive class. I'm
Exactly.
advocating for mutuality. I'm advocating for a shared sense of power. That's very different than just another, lording over. It's
Yeah.
like, no, I think we're created in God's image, all of us, male and female. There's no hierarchy in Christ, but we are one in Christ. It's like that's what I'm advocating for. And to me, that's a very different and not what I see often in churches.
Yeah. Where Paul says, I'm not going to quote him perfectly, in Christ there is neither male nor female. We
That's right.
don't understand today how scandalous that was,
Oh,
and
yes.
that is still scandalous for us today.
That's
But
right.
even more so in the day when Paul first wrote it. That
That's
was
right.
totally countercultural.
Oh, in that society, it was just so, I mean, what Jesus was doing, literally, a woman at the well asking to share a drink, that's sharing spit with an unclean woman. She wasn't unclean. Like, not only did the Jews, think she was unclean because she's a Samaritan, she was a Samaritan among the Samaritans. Like, even she was looked down on her by her own people.
Yeah.
And it's like, and Jesus like, no, I want to share spit with you. Like, what?
Yeah.
It's wild. And so you're referring to Galatians, 3:20-28. There's no Jew or Greek, no slave or free, male or female.
Yes.
Or Acts 2:18, I'll pour out my spirit, both men and women will prophesy. It's like this is what we're talking about. And yet you can read about it in chapter 6, problematic biblical text. We've taken a few misinterpreted texts and we've taken those texts and we have weaponized them against women and we have misinterpreted them and we have used them as weapons. And it reminds me of in what is it, 1807, the slave Bible, where they
Yes.
took passages like
Yeah.
slaves obey your earthly masters. So that was like, oh, okay. Well, they created the slave Bible. And you know what they did? They actually removed the story of Exodus from the Bible.
Yep.
Why? Because they would hate it to inspire black people to break free from their oppressive system.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's, in a sense, that's partly of what we've done to women is I think the powers that be want to keep the structure because I get to keep power and control. I don't have to deal with my depravity.
Mm. Well, you've mentioned the book a few times, and let's just get real explicit. Safe Church, How to Guard Against Sexism and Abuse in Christian Communities. Just invite people to check it out and to wherever else they can find you online.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can follow me on Facebook. Got a large following there, and then you can find us in our workshops. My wife is amazing as well. In her new book, Her Rights, that might be something you want to check out. She's amazing, but we can find us at www.christiancc.org.
Okay. And your personal website,
Yep. Yeah,
andrewjbauman.com.
that's where I
Um,
blog. I blog mostly there. Yep.
Yep. We're going to make links available under this video or
Awesome.
in the show notes if you're listening. This has been stretching and encouraging. Thank you so much. I'm glad you and I have here met face to face, even though virtual face to face, and many blessings to you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Carol. Great meeting you.
Whether or not you agreed with everything Dr. Bauman said, I am sure you can agree that things need to change. If you are a man, I pray you heard this as full of hope that the places where you are stuck, you don't have to stay. If you are a woman, I hope you heard it as full of hope also. Find the others, find your people. Like Andrew was saying, 1 in 3 is what a lot of the statistics show, or at best 1 in 4. So if there are more than 3 other women in church where you go on Sunday morning, one or more of them has experienced it too. find the others. Tell somebody. That's my plea to you as a woman. And then if you are a man, we as sisters in Christ need your strength on our behalf. Your heart matters. Do the work, and we need your strength. That's my brief closing comments there. Under this video, you will find the links to the Christian Counseling Center that Dr. Bauman directs, to his personal website where he blogs and some social media, and to the book he has released, Safe Church: How to Guard Against Sexism and Abuse in the Christian Communities. You may not agree with every line in that book, but it will open your eyes, it will stretch you, and it will point you in some good ways to grow, to become more of who God needs you to be, and God willing, your influence to those around you. I want to also mention our in-person intensives at Dr. Carroll Ministries. We are addressing women in particular around their sexual story, both what has happened to them and how they may have responded. Whether they responded in untoward sexual behaviors themselves, or hating sex and how it impacted their relationships, all the junk of your sexual story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then most important, experience Jesus coming into your story. Check out drcarrollministries.com/intensives. You'll also see that link under this video, and I would love to talk with you about coming to one of these healing experiences, and you can become more whole. Thank you again for watching here to the end and being part of our online family here. You can leave me a message confidentially at drcarrollministries.com, the contact page, or just leave a comment under this video. I read them all. And until next time, may God bless you.